I'm Wil LaVeist. This is Eric Claville, and you tune into LaVeist and Claville, where we give it to you straight talk, just the way it is, from a black male's perspective. So let's get right to it. On today's show, social engineers, how HBCU grads has helped shape the 2020 political landscape. So Eric, with Kamala Harris, Howard University grad, becoming the first woman to be a vice president, first black woman, obviously, woman of color. The fact that she's an HBCU grad has been all over the news, all over everybody's consciousness, and finally put to rest what we've all known as HBCU grads, that our institutions are premier institutions and have been vital to black people and black America. So where do you think we are at now? With finally, have we crossed this level, or HBCUs are ready to thrive, not only just survive?
Well, Will, look, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we've known it. We're both HBCU graduates. Our family HBCU graduates. My children are getting ready to go to HBCUs. And we teach, and we've both taught at HBCUs. And we know the quality, right? We know what HBCUs do for African Americans.
Absolutely.
Particularly also do for the world, right? So, because when you look at, I like the title this week as social engineers. I mean, when you look at what HBCU graduates have done to change the social landscape of not just America, but the world, I mean, it speaks volumes, and we're finally getting the credit for it. Now, keep in mind, Dr. Martin Luther King, HBCU graduate. Jesse Jackson, HBCU graduate.
Right.
The list goes on. And those are just a few that I just named, but the list goes on and on. But in this landscape, when you talk about the new political landscape, first and foremost, Madam Vice President Harris.
Right. Key players have made a difference in this.
Absolutely. One step away from the White House, right? Actually in the White House as vice president of our great country.
Right.
Then look at the great work that Stacey Abrams has done, right? In getting out the vote, Spelman graduate. Also look at the great work that the mayor of Atlanta has done, Keisha Lance Bottoms.
FAMU.
Florida A&M,
right.
University graduate. And then U.S. Senator, African American, male, U.S. out of Georgia.
First.
Oh, come on.
Morehouse grad, and then to mention the one who actually made it possible for Biden, gave the regeneration in his campaign. You got James Clyburn, South Carolina State.
Absolutely. So the list goes on and on and on, Will. And one thing that we're bringing out today is that if you haven't noticed, now you got to stand up and take notice. HBCUs have always been here making change. And not only are we making change, but we're here to stay to continue making change in the right direction for our country.
One of the things I loved about, Kamala Harris, when she took the oath of office, she used the same Bible that Thurgood Marshall used when he became the first black Chief Justice member of the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall, HBCU grad from my alma mater, Lincoln University. That's right. As well as he's Howard, and as well as he was a Howard Law grad. So
wait a minute, is that Lincoln in Missouri or
no? This is Reed Lincoln, the first, the mother of them all, first HBCU, founded in 1854, of which all came after the Lincoln University. But Thurgood, as well as Langston Hughes, is an alum of Lincoln as well. But Thurgood also is an alum of Howard Law, which in those times, you were African American. Howard was the first law school and one of the few only law schools that a lot of African Americans were able to go to.
Absolutely. And look, we've had other African American lawyers that were able to cross over into PWIs, and primarily the ones that were more private, more liberal. Of course, Paul Robeson comes to mind, who was a great thespian. Along with being a
strong connection to Lincoln University. Paul Robeson used to be a football coach at Lincoln. His father was a Lincoln man.
Yep. Absolutely, and that's a great story within itself. Who I believe is a true Renaissance man, African American Renaissance man in our time. So again, just as we're talking, Will, I mean, we didn't even plan to talk about Paul Robeson, right? But because of HBCUs, he rises to the top. And one of the great things I love about, again, that I love about our institutions. I'm a Southern University 2 times over graduate, Southern University undergrad, Southern University Law Center, is that we make the conscious decision to come to an environment to where we have an opportunity for some of the best and the brightest of us can come together and live together, learn together, and a lot of great ideas, a lot of great partnerships, a lot of great partners in professions came out of HBCUs. Right. Those time periods in the dorms, those time periods in the quad, those time periods on the yard, where we can talk about and generate, our ideas, and really where a lot of these movements came out of.
Absolutely. One of the things, and I know this has been a pet peeve of yours as well, is people who are not familiar. A lot of Black people will say, well, HBCUs, it's not the real world. You want to be in a world where you got diversity, so forth and so on. It doesn't prepare you for the real world. And again, you hear that. When you do hear that, it particularly comes from Black people. You hear it from people who don't know anything about that environment. And in fact, when you go to an HBCU, with the diversity that you get is learning about the diversity that exists within the Black community. I remember coming out of Brooklyn, New York, right? And the most I had heard coming out of Brooklyn, New York in the 80s about go-go music was Chuck Brown's I Feel Like Bustin' Loose. Now, if you know anything about Chuck Brown, you know that I Feel Like Bustin' Loose was a commercial. That wasn't even go-go. That was commercial Chuck Brown breakthrough. I get down to Lincoln and you got students coming from DC, coming from Baltimore, coming from all parts of the country, coming from Africa, coming from the Caribbean. And you get this whole mix of the diaspora, all the diversity that exists in our community. So it was at Lincoln that I first got a real introduction to the full culture of go-go music. Or then in which all of these things, and I just mentioned music because music, food, these things are really endemic to any culture. But when you get to experience all of these different types of people, I've heard so many people come to realize that we learn about ourselves.
That's right.
We learn about who we are. And in learning about yourself, you get this level of confidence about your place in the world and how you can make a difference.
Now, Will, you hit something on a nail on the head there when you talk about building confidence. I want to talk about the diversity of our community in just a moment, but building on confidence. It was at our HBCUs where I was told I could be the next great this. I could be the next great that, right? It was that encouragement that I received from professors, from mentors that said, I can do this. Not saying, oh, well, nobody's ever done that before. I'm not sure if you have the family pedigree to do this or do that. But I was never told I couldn't do it. I was always told that I could and that I should, and I could be the leader. So it's building that confidence when we go out into the world, the rest of the world, where when you come against adversity, when you come against people telling you can't do this or do that, pull back, right, to those that said that you could. The vice president talks about her sisterhood, of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, how she, relied upon them and pulled back to them, right? And it also reminds me, being from Louisiana myself, how she was raised, a great story about her being raised in Richmond, California, by a African-American female from Louisiana, who was like a godmother, right? And how that instilling her with, being proud, being Black and proud in America, and those things were tremendous in her growth. Because how could she become the DA in San Francisco? How should she become the first African-American woman?
Got to have confidence in herself.
Of California. How could she even say, I'm going to run for Senate, become one of the first African-American females, U.S. senators, the first out of California? And then hey, I could be president, and he ended up becoming vice president. So is that confidence, and I want to go back to the diversity of our community. You're right.
Mhm.
We have, there's a book called The Great Migration that was written by, I think, Cheryl Wilkerson. I know her last name is Wilkerson, but she wrote the book, and it talked about how African Americans spread across the country.
From primarily the South, going north and going west for greater opportunities, right?
Exactly. And that's why you find, I know part of my mother's family, almost half are in California, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
there for better opportunities. And you see this now diversity of African Americans adding our sprinkle, right? Because we always add that sprinkle of soul, that sprinkle of this to anywhere we go, right? So you see that diversity all in California, all in Seattle, in Washington, all in the Midwest and the like.
Right.
So when we come back together, right? So when we come back together, now you have these what came out of a foundation of African American culture in the South.
Right.
Now there's the difference, right? There's little differences. So you could even see it in jazz, right? Some people look at New Orleans jazz. Some people look at, of course, what the big bands did and Duke Ellington and all those on the East Coast. But
Right.
go to Monk and all those on the West Coast. And what they added to it. So you see this diversity, and we come back together, and it's like a regathering.
Right. And in every community, you see where Black folks arrived at and built community, you see this different flavor of music,
Yeah.
of
That's the word
culture,
I
of
wanted.
art, of expression that comes out. Like, for example, it's interesting. You mentioned Richmond, California. It was through going to HBCUs and kind of experiencing people from New Orleans that I even understood and came to realize that there was a pipeline going from Louisiana to Richmond, California because of jobs in the defense industry. And it's
Absolutely.
like, it's a lot of these. And so you hear so much about Oakland, and then you wonder, what's this rhythm? What's this flavor that's coming out of Richmond, California? And then you start to dig into the history and learn. You said, about learning about yourself and confidence. It was at Lincoln that I was introduced to journalism. I had been exposed to it, obviously growing up in New York, but I became introduced to Black journalism, our history, our ancestry. It was where I first really learned about Freedom's Journal, the first Black
Really?
newspaper,
Wow.
1827. And reading those words, we aim to plead our own cause. That actually is when I became hooked on journalism,
Wow.
to understanding that our history, our legacy, how from the very beginnings, our people were fighting for liberation and believing in the promise of this country of being one of equality and for all. And we're at the forefront of fighting for it. And then you talk about opportunities. It was actually a journalism professor, Dr. Joanne Gavin, now at James Madison University in Virginia, who looked at me in the classroom. I tell this story about how she looked at me in the classroom and said, "I'm going to make you the editor of the newspaper." When you
Wow.
talk about Black professors and the impact that they have on students and the opportunities you get to be able to be in leadership positions that you may not even been thinking about. She saw something in me I didn't necessarily see in myself. And that turned into a 20 plus year career in journalism where I was able to raise a family, buy homes, mortgages, all of these things because somebody saw something in me and was willing to invest in me in an environment at an HBCU. And that's often what you get there. As you mentioned earlier, we both taught at HBCUs and at predominantly
Absolutely.
white institutions. And it's not to say that you don't get that kind of one-to-one relationship with the professor, but oftentimes it's on the HBCU campus where you get that professor that also understands the legacy, the
Right.
importance, and is as committed to, like the great debaters who's actually a movie by Denzel Washington is
And
talking
they
about
part. That's
Tolson,
right.
a Lincoln man, right? The great
Right.
debaters. And he talks about, I'm trying to save you from your own righteous mind.
That's right.
That
But Will,
scene.
hey, Will,
That's what happens at HBC.
hey, now, so you mentioned Tulsa. So there's a Lincoln connection with the actual father. But then, of course, he goes to Wiley College to teach. But
That's right.
guess who was our history professor at Southern University?
Who was that?
Tolson's son.
There you go.
So again, just look, we never planned to talk. I never knew that Lincoln connection. We never planned to talk about this. But as we continue to talk, I mean, look at these great connections that we have. And look, we talk about what HBCU graduates did to change the landscape, right, of the political landscape. But let's look at entertainment for a moment. Look at the Spike Lees. Look at the Samuel L. Jackson, both Morehouse men, right?
Right.
Even Denzel Washington's son, who went to Morehouse, who's now making his stride in entertainment.
Debbie Allen, Howard University. Felicia Rashad.
Yeah, both sisters graduated from Howard, right? And look, let's look at Oprah Winfrey, Tennessee State, right? So you had this black girl out of Mississippi who became this now worldwide movement. I mean, she's just not a personality. She's a movement. Whatever Oprah touches turns to gold. You get a car, you get a car. You know, maybe she can come on the LaVeist and Claville show and give out. You never know.
Right.
But again, it's all these great connections. And one great journalist, Ed Bradley, comes to mind. You mentioned Pennsylvania, of course, Cheney University at the time, State College. I'm a huge fan of 60 Minutes and investigative journalism. And, I think about him. Here's this guy.
A hero, yeah. One of my heroes, certainly.
Absolutely a juggernaut in journalism, a trailblazer. Got his start at HBCU. So again, it's these types of things, Will, that I think now the spotlight rightfully is on, but we've always known this. We've always known this. And it's time for us to be more appreciative of it. It's time for us to speak it loud. And it's time for society to stand up. But I want to say something about diversity, not just of Black people, but of faculty.
Right.
So HBCUs have been some of the most diverse faculty and still are today in America, right? So where PWIs may get one Black professor here or one professor from this country, HBCUs have always had professors there. And there's a wonderful book, and hopefully we can talk about it more in depth with the author or go into the history, but it's called From Swastika to Jim Crow. And it's a little unknown history about Jewish scholars who escaped Nazi Germany that came to America because of the racism of Jewish people at that time. They found refuge at HBCUs. Yeah. So you got a lot of HBCUs that have a phenomenal history, with Jewish scholars from Germany, and some that actually stayed and really made a name for themselves at those universities. One that comes to mind, of course, is Tougaloo College University, where one of the great constitutional law professors there stayed there for years, decades. And of course, there's a scholarship chair named after him now. Right. African-American political leaders were actually went to Tougaloo, taught by him. And it was because of that connection and that love for the students. So
I mean, you're right. The schools themselves have a rich history and stories. Like, I talk about obviously Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, but you have the Lincoln University is in Jefferson City. That university was founded by Buffalo soldiers.
Wow.
We're at the root of founding that institution. So I absolutely have love for that institute. You got Wilberforce, which is the first Black-owned and run HBCU, because a lot of the schools were founded by white benefactors or white church related, which is the case for Lincoln, which is also the case for Howard, But you got Wilberforce, which is Black-owned, the first Black-owned, Black-run HBCU.
Right.
So the schools themselves have, powerful stories. Bethune Cookman, Mary McLeod Bethune, was a legend in terms of
tremendous, tremendous.
So it's the schools themselves.
Booker T. Washington,
powerful.
At Tuskegee, man. Booker T. Washington taking what he learned.
What he learned from Hampton, went down to Tuskegee and developed it and became a leader in Black education. So these are the
greatest leaders in education.
So these institutions, I absolutely, value. They absolutely worth it. They're powerful American institutions. So, as we wrap up, we look at this. What should our people do in terms of the HBCU story and continuing to shape, the political landscape. What should our people do, Eric?
Well, again, stand up, be proud graduates of HBCUs, support our HBCUs, and it's not just supported with our dollars, with our positive coverage, but also with sending our greatest assets there, our family, our children, if it is so their choice. And I'll say this last thing, Will. As it relates to HBCUs, keep in mind, not only are they needed today and relevant, but they are thriving now. There's been a whirlwind of philanthropy, philanthropic giving to our institutions. So let's make sure that we continue that upward trend, because at the end of the day, we have an opportunity to educate ourselves. And that's the greatest gift I think that we can give, not just to ourselves, but our posterity as we continue to live and pass through this earth.
Well, I absolutely love what you said about support, because as alums in any kind of institution, if the alums are not supporting the institution, then those who are looking to support educational endeavors, they're going to say, why should I support this institution if your alums are not supporting?
Absolutely.
So when you talk about what we should do as alums, we absolutely need to support our schools, support all HBCUs. Just cut the check. Support it with your time, talent, and treasure. But if you can't do it with your treasure, with your money, support it with your time. But absolutely support it with your money. Just cut the check. Whether you graduated or not, and got your degree, you're still an alum if you went. And everybody's family, as we pointed out, in some way, shape, or form, has been touched by an HBCU.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Take us home, Eric.
So look, that's a wrap for this week of LaVeist and Claville. Again, thanks to our producer, Ben Bailey, behind the controls. Join us each week as we bring it to you straight with facts from a Black male perspective. Don't forget, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and our website at laveistandclaville.com. If you have a question, email us at laveistandclaville@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you. Until next time, we'll see you then.